Hi, it's Monday, at least here in Michigan, and it's 1 minute after 10 Eastern Daylight Time. We have daylight time, I think, for another week or so. So you know what time it is. Yeah, it's 10:01 Eastern Daylight Time in the U.S. But it's also time for relaxing painting with Dice and Dungeons, and today there will be more painting than not. There will be some sanding, no filing, but there will be some sanding as I prep a couple of pieces. But these pieces are primed, and they need to be painted. And they're just a little bit challenging because there's no place to hold them. And they need to be painted on both sides. So I'm going to have to give that some thought. There's well, I might just have to paint one side and then the other. I'm not sure. I haven't really given that. I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to do this. But I've got these parts that need to be painted on both sides. And I'll need to look up the painting instructions. I think these are painted. Well, no, this is painted the desert yellow because it's all wood. Okay, in the scheme of things. This is, I believe, one of those pieces that has a metal supports on it. These things are metal supports. It's like this one, okay, which is finished. This is a done piece where there's metal braces vertically, and I'm pretty sure those need to be painted dark gray. I don't know what's going on down here. I'm going to have to look that up. These pieces are a little bit challenging. They're going to be challenging. They're parts of the cockpit. Pretty much they go around like this. Somehow I'll figure it out when the time comes. They have these little brackets on them to which there are attached control mechanisms like throttles and little wheels for trim and things like that. And the problem is that the holes go all the way through. So the lattice work is painted the wood color, and these bits here are painted the dark gray on both sides. Okay. But after the parts are attached, then the holes need to be filled in and painted on the other side. And there's going to be a bunch of touching up one way and the other until it looks right. Well, no, there's weirdness. Like this has a hole on this side to attach something, and there's none on the other side. But this doesn't have any attachment at all. It's just a control thing. There's a control box with some switches on it, but there's a hole on the back. Go figure. And then the machine guns, of course, there's no place to hold those. I'm going to try to get kind of, what's going on here? After it's primed, I don't have to look at that with my head magnifiers. So the barrel of the machine gun is sheathed in a radiator, basically. So that's the barrel, this tiny little thing there, that bit. And this bigger thing around it with the roughness, its perforations, is a radiator. And I want to, even though the instructions don't say to do it, I'm going to paint the barrel a darker color and the radiator a lighter color. It'd It's going to be that kind of day, isn't it? I had magnifiers and there are no magnifying lenses. Great. What I'm concerned about here is that after I primed it, and I didn't see this before, it looks like there actually is. I didn't see this when I was prepping it. Along the top, this was molded in an injection mold. And along the top here is visibly a seam. Plastic oozed out a little bit between the parts of the mold. And it's only in one direction. One side is slightly higher than the other. But the problem is that this is right at the top. Okay. And when this is painted a metallic color, that is just going to jump right out. And you could kind of pretend that the radiator is made up of two parts that are welded down the middle, but no, that's just a plastic seam. Fresh coffee, thank you. And it's on the bottom too. And I didn't notice it before. I should have suspected that it was going to be there. So I'm going to have to sand that off and then either reprime them or just paint it otherwise. Inspecting these parts, I think they have C, that same issue with them. They're pretty thin. Okay, so they seem to be okay. All right. Well, I can't paint the machine guns immediately because I need to do some unexpected sanding. And then I'll get to these. Yeah, there's always something, right? So I'm going to be doing a little more sanding today than I had thought I would be doing. And that means a little less painting, but there's usually hardly any painting going on anyway. So I've been working on this model for a million years, and so far I've got the cart done, and I got some pieces painted here. These four are finished. This is essentially finished once it's inserted into and attached here like that. Okay, well, not like that correctly anyway. Once it's put in correctly, then I'll be washing it so that it has more of the wood tone than it does now. But I'm not going to do that until it's assembled, until this is put onto here. Before I put it onto here, there's these little bumps here that I'm going to say are metallic brackets that hold this in place, rather like wooden pegs. And the bottom needs to be painted. So I'm going to, this is an important thing to do. So I've probably, I'm probably going to paint these bits fairly early on, just so that if touching up needs to be done, I can do the touching up. The bottom, like the top, will probably require 3 coats. I put thin coats on, and it turned out okay. And it looks pretty decent. And the circles are scarcely visible where it's important for them not to be. Okay, well, and I've got the gas tank and the seat. sorts of little things to do here. Let me get the painting instructions. These are the bits here that I'm working on, and they're not all the bits. I haven't pulled out the tiny little bits, all the little bits here and here, because the framework has to get done for them anyway, and then I'll get them out and then try not to drop them. So just to check things over, I've got a translation chart that translates the numbers like 40. Okay. Number 40 is German gray, which is this dark gray color. 19 is desert yellow. So yes, in fact, this entire piece is painted that color. And yes, indeed, that's so weird. Okay. This is this piece here. This piece here doesn't have that picture, doesn't have those little round blobs on the bottom. So that makes me wonder, here I am wondering, whether in fact those need to come off. I don't know why they would be there. They weren't part of the sprue. Doesn't look like they should come off, but they very back of the cockpit. When it goes on, it attaches back here like this. There's a tiny little slot there, tiny slot there, and a tiny slot here. And the slots go into each other like that. Okay, well, yet one more thing. Okay, that was not clear at all. See, it does fit like this, and then those stick out the bottom. But when this is here, okay, that's flush. So those little round button things do not belong there. So the seams on the top and bottoms of the machine guns and these little blobs on the bottom here have to come off, and then that has to be sanded down. So the only part, this part's okay, and the side parts are okay. So when this fits in, you can see these little corners here. Oh man, I don't know. What's up with that? So it's little corners. Yeah, I thought about painting those metallic, and now I'm not. Okay, I'm going to say that those were triangles of wood that were attached to the hull to help position all of this. Otherwise, they would just jump out. They would be very, very, they would look really out of place. So I'm going to just not do that. I'm not going to do the thing I said I was going to do. Yeah, this fits in there very snugly. There we go. And I put it in and out a couple of times. I'm doing it again without breaking any of the parts, right? Don't break any of the parts. Which makes me think that when I put it in, I might not even need to cement it because it fits so tightly. You know, it's just there. It's in. I'm going to just leave it in. There's no reason not to at this point. And it's not coming out. Not. There, it's just in. So it looks like it's assembled. It's not, but it's not going anywhere. Which means that I can maybe at some point do the wash on it. Put the brown wash on it. But not, yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere. I put a bit of cement down, like right here at the front, maybe underneath this big metal piece. Self and talking myself in and out of doing something. I could put little dabs of cement just right on the bottoms of those. We just let it. Well, it's not coming out. I popped it in and out a couple of times, but not this time. Great. Looking at the colors for the seat, it's 55, which is khaki. Okay, it's a color a brand new color that I haven't used. It's over there somewhere. And the back of the seat is painted silvery. Yeah, this is anyway. Yep. Okay, well, I'm going to do the sanding stuff first and then the painting stuff next because a lot of stuff now needs to be sanded that I didn't expect. This is the fuel tank. I'm going to dump this out because that needs some work as well. And I'm going to not do what I was planning to do. I'm going to do it slightly differently, and I'll explain that in a bit. So these parts can be painted at some point in the future. Maybe even on this stream, we'll see. And if I don't knock them off and drop them on the floor or break them or anything. These pieces of tape are not necessary anymore. Different parts will be taped to this. Because those need to be primed. All right. So the plan for today is a little different than I had thought it was going to be, but I'll just go over it. These little bits on the bottom here that looked like they belong there, but now they don't, need to come off, and then the bottom needs to be sanded. The machine guns have little seam marks from the molding process on the tops and the bottoms, and I didn't notice it, but I should have anticipated it when I prepped them to begin with, and I want to sand those off, and then I'll see whether they need to be primed again before they're painted or not. And if they're going to be painted, I'm going to paint the barrel, which runs through the radiator, a dark color, like all these little indentations, and then the surface of it will be painted the gunmetal color, as will the rest of this. And then this bit here and these bits here, I'll highlight those somehow with a slightly different color paint. The seat had a divot on it, had one of those molding holes that I filled with epoxy. This all needs to be sanded down so smooth. So that will be a thing. And then this was made up of two parts, and the seams need to be sanded and the whole outside needs to be polished. And it looks like the cement sealed the seams pretty well, so that needs to be done. So that's the abrasion part of today. The painting part of today will be probably putting desert yellow paint on these, the bottom of the hull, 3 coats. I might even start with that when I do painting. Might even, because it has to dry between coats, I might even do that sooner than later, maybe. And then the sanding and filing will just grab one part after another and do that while the paint is drying on the hull. I'm going to put a cushion here. Turn that over because that's the stuff that's going to get painted. Okay. What I was initially thinking of doing, what I was planning to do, was I was going to good. This is going to be a dropping things day, so I better work well over the bench. I was going to assemble this. Put these parts together and then prime the whole thing after it was assembled. But I'm not going to do that. And here's the reason why. The reason why is that these bands that go around the tank, these bands that go around the tank that hold it in place, you can see there's all sorts of very nicely molded little screws and bolts and stuff that I'm going to try to highlight. Anyway, that is painted a different color than the tank. And if I put this on, I've got to be very careful around both sides, right? But if I paint them separately, then at least this side of the band is more relaxing because I can just paint it. Yeah, I can just paint it and only have to worry about this side of the band on both sides. So these two bits can be primed and painted separately, as well as this. So when I talked about tape, I tape these bits to this piece of cardboard before I spray paint them because these parts are very tiny and they fly around. So I can put, at least these are kind of different in that they only get painted on one side. There, and I can prime them. Now, when they're actually being painted, that's a different kettle of fish. That's a weird phrase, isn't it? That's why I said it, because it's weird. It's a different situation. It's a different story. It's not a story. It's not a kettle of fish. It's none of those things, really. Actually, the bottoms of this do need to be primed because these get painted here. So I was wrong. They do need to be flipped over. Prime this, then flip them over. Okay. And then this will go on a piece of tape as well. This isn't going to show, so that will be okay. This is like a pressure relief valve or a filling thing. That should be painted a different color. But that's how that goes. These bits here all need sanding. All three of them I did not expect to need sanding, and yet they do. Which means that all of the time that I've spent so far working on this model has resulted in the cart being finished and these 4 little bits. Although that part, I think, should count. And so this will go on yet longer without much being completed. This is the work du jour here. But first, cut the red wire. Oh, sorry, too late. But first I am going to put a coat of paint on this, which means that all of these parts that I just put here, okay, I need to move them aside. Just keep doing that and put this here where I can work on it. Fresh coffee is better than the not fresh coffee. I'll drink some of the not fresh first. In the background, there is a sound that says that task needed to be done. It's a task that needed to be done and hasn't been done. I'll move that way over there so that after this is painted, I can put it far away from the sanding dust. And I don't need the head magnifiers quite yet. Keep them handy. Yeah, there. I'm doing poorly today. I am just putting things down on top of a thing that I need and, just making a mess of stuff. But shortly after this, soon, not shortly, that's another, just weird use of words, right? After a very brief period of time during which I am mixing the paint, after that, I'll be putting one coat of paint on the bottom here. And after I do that, I will put it way over there and start the sanding stuff that needs to be done. Usually I use the paint from the bottle cap because I don't like to waste it, but it gums up too quickly. And what's that? Is that the mixing ball? Bubbles. Great. All right. One of the very rare surfaces that can be painted the way painting should be done. Long, smooth strokes. This bit here. Same thing here. See? Not a bubble. level nicely while it dries, and then I'll get a second coat put on. And I'll have a beautiful, flawless surface, maybe. And if that turns out to be a flaw, because there was a little bubble there, well, then I'll decide what to do. These parts in view here, and then I'll just have to decide which ones go first. Okay. No, I picked this one up, so I'm not going to do it first. This one's going to be first. And I need to have my little saw because for some reason, these little blobs of plastic are on there when they're not supposed to be, and I didn't notice that. Yeah, and I want to saw them off and not break them off because I don't want to break it into the part. Usually what I have are those little circles that need to be sanded out or filled in. But in this case, I've got weird chunks of plastic. Reasons unknown. To take just a little bit of like polished sanding on the bottom. Feeling it to see if the finger is more sensitive than the vision there. This is just so the part fits nicely on the bottom. You know, when it's put on, that it's flush. Okay, well, this part's actually ready to be painted. Then I can put it there. I don't need these anymore. Nope, need a little saw. The saw away. Set it aside. Remember it where it is when I need it. Guess I'm going to do the tank. I'm going to use a fairly grit on this, and then because there isn't that much to take off, I hope it'll go kind of quickly. With sanding out, a little bit of where the Cement oozed out through the seam when they were compressed. So I'm using the 800 grit, which is fairly fine. Banding this, and there's a little bit of where the sprue is attached that's sort of discolored, and I can't feel it. So it's like it was sort of just indented into the fuel tank. You know how a branch grows into a trunk of a tree, kind of. Sometimes what I find is that there might be a difference in color, but there isn't really anything there. I see it, but I can't feel it, so I can't tell if it's really there or not. You know, I'll be able to tell when it's primed. This is painted metallic, and so the metallic paints will show little bits of flaws. I mean, they really do. But I think this side's at least that little discoloration there. Pretty well. Do the other side then. Going to have the same thing. There's this little spot there where the sprue was, and that is just going to be a different color. Then I'm going to go over this whole thing. I'm going to do this whole, rub the whole thing down with this 800 grit to keep the surface texture, I guess I'll call it, the uniform. And then I'm going to go over the whole thing with a like 1200 grit to polish it. And sanding it in this direction so that if there's anything that does show, it's going to be in the same direction as the painting is going to be, which is longitudinal along the tank, as opposed to, say, radial, longitudinal from front one side, one end to the other, rather than radial around it. I'll put this on a piece of cardboard and a piece of tape and prime it either later today or tomorrow, and then I'll be able to paint it on Wednesday. Running silent today. I don't know. Maybe I'll talk about airplanes. I mean, I've never flown. I mean, I've been in airplanes, so I have been transported in airplanes, but I've not been a pilot or co-pilot on a plane. But when I was growing up, I grew up in an Air Force family. My dad was no longer in active service. My uncle was. My father had been a cadet during World War II, and the war ended before he finished his flight training. That my uncle saw combat. I won't be telling those stories, but that's just sort of the background. But that led to sort of a fascination with airplanes, and so got to learn about, World War II hadn't been that far in the past when I was growing up. Well, in some senses, a relatively recent event. The two planes were still things that we learned about and built models of. Everybody's favorite, of course, was the P-51 Mustang, so I built models of that. Cool ones, which actually wasn't really a good idea, but it was a cool thing to do, was they, how you get a plastic model, sometimes there's chromed parts, like the windshield of a car, right, or the wheels of a car. Those were the most common things. Some company produced a Mustang model. The whole thing was chromed. And I guess it was supposed to look like, like a lot of the Mustangs weren't painted, at least not very much. They just left them, they're aluminum. But there's a big difference between, the color and sheen of aluminum and chrome. Anyway, this model was chromed. There's a real downside to that too, though. If anybody has, built models with chromed parts, is that if the cement touches them, then the chrome bubbles up off of the plastic surface, and yeah, that's not a good thing when that. Kind of feeling that. Can I? Just trying to get the light right. And of course, one can't paint it then because it's already been chromed, and so the the seams all showed, even if the cement didn't get on them because couldn't fill the seams in, or anyway. So I built that. It was very shiny, except where the cement, got onto the chrome surface, or where the seams showed. Except for the flaws, it was a pretty cool model. But realistically, it was not a realistic model. It was just shiny. But I built that. I remember that. And I got off onto that because, World War II planes, P-51 was everyone's favorite, although there were other pretty good planes. The Brits had the Spitfire. The Germans had some interesting planes like the Me-262. I don't remember learning too much about that. Okay, well, I think other than the spot where the sprue was, which is just, I'm hoping, discolored and not otherwise visible, I think the seams of the fuel tank are pretty well gone. This can join the end caps. This on the priming surface here. I found this to be really convenient because I can't spray paint down here. It's not a well ventilated area. So I take this to another area of the house, and it's just convenient to carry these parts back and forth on this, as well as keeping them from flying away during the painting process. Well, this is going to be, you can see where the epoxy's there, and it's kind of raised above the surface. It's not very high, but that all needs to be smoothed out. So I was thinking about using some really coarse sandpaper, like 150 grit, to do like the initial. But I'm not going to, for two reasons. One is the epoxy is, although it's hard, it's not as hard as the plastic, and this could just end up pulling it out. I'm going to use the 600 grit. Initially, and then polish out the marks. I learned my lesson when I filled the holes in the hull of the plane. When I filled in those circles, is that this takes a while. It just does. The epoxy is kind of hard. It's also not hard like the plastic. Anyway, if it isn't gently sanded, it's possible to dislodge the epoxy patch from the part. And then that totally misses the point and has to be redone. Gently, you can see it. You can see how it's lighter in color. That's where it's being sanded, and I'm, sanding past it onto the top there. But eventually the entire, here you can begin seeing it now. You can see the circle, the shiny circle around the center. That's the raised part. And then when the shiny part disappears, then it's at the correct, then it's at the same level as the rest of it. When I'm done with this, I'll be able to put a second coat on the hull of the bottom of the fuselage of the plane. It'll be dry by then. It looked like it went down really evenly, okay, and it kind of did, but I can see that it is, as it's drying, it's not that even, and so a second coat will be required, and then possibly a third. The whole back of and sides of this are going to be painted metallic. So after this is done, in order to keep the surface texture consistent all the way around, I will use this emery cloth, the silicone carbide paper to polish it, or in this case, unpolish it, in this case, polish it. As I found with the circles on the fuselage, this part is where it starts getting to be frustrating. It looks like it's almost done, okay, and it is, but this part, because the surface area of the epoxy is larger, it just takes, this part takes longer. Think, oh, it's almost done. Well, it is almost done, but it's not done. So I was fascinated by planes and learned mainly about the Air Force planes. Not too much about the Navy planes at the time because, my uncle was in the Air Force and my dad had been. Although the F6F, the Hellcat, came, all the cats, it was what, Wildcat was the F4F, and then the Hellcat, and the Bearcat. The Bearcat was a very powerful plane, but that came right at the end of the war. And then there was a 2-engine cat, the Tiger Cat, that came later too. That was a really pretty plane, but I don't know that it was ever used in any kind of military kind of thing. The Bearcat, which had an immensely powerful engine, not too many of those were made. A modified version of that held like the world's piston engine speed record for a good long time. It was kind of dominant in the Reno air races, that kind of thing. But the Hellcat that came in, the F6F that came in kind of used in the Pacific, that's where the Navy, flew off the carriers, right? That was actually a really superior plane. For takeoff and landing on the carriers and decent range. The Air Force flew in the Pacific as well from, once a land base was established, and mainly on the P-38s there. 51s didn't really get there. I'm not quite sure how those decisions were made, why certain planes flew more in Europe and certain planes in the Pacific, but the P-38s were the major Air Force fighter plane in the Pacific. That was the 2-engine plane. It's the one my dad was learning how to fly as a cadet in New Mexico and Texas. So yeah, I learned a lot about World War II planes, but the things that really captured my attention at the time were all the developments in the new fighters, all the jets. And the jets, instead of having a new model come out every 30 years, like it seems like it does now, right? Some of these planes, like the F-16 was a design from, I think, back in the 80s even. New ones seem to be coming out just all the time, constantly. And I built models of those. And planes were developed and put into service that really had no use or value. Like there was strategic bombers were a thing. Even though intercontinental ballistic missiles were under development and came into service in the 1960s. Before that, the only way really to drop all your thermonuclear weapons on the other side was to fly them over. So there was the modified B-29. It's kind of upgraded. It's called a B-50, which was really a B-29. But then this monster plane came out. We were all fascinated by it, the B-36. And the B-36 was created because thermonuclear weapons at the time were huge. They were the size of like a pickup truck. And they weighed a lot. These were not miniaturized, put it on the tip of your missile warheads. These were gigantic things. And so it needed a gigantic plane to hold them. And the B-36 was created. I think it could carry 2. The plane had 6 piston engines, some of the largest and most complicated radial piston engines ever made. And when it was fully loaded, not only were these thermonuclear weapons large, they were heavy. When it was fully loaded, those piston engines were not sufficient to get it up off the ground. And so they put 4 jet engines on it, 2 on each wingtip, that were used. They were fired up and they used them to take off. The range wasn't huge. And so in order to assure that they could get to their target, and what the targets were then the Soviet Union, right? Most of them were stationed up in Alaska because, that was close, relatively close. The downside, though, was that it was very cold, especially in the winter. And so it had problems with the oil freezing, and the engines were incredibly temperamental anyway. The story was there was this very lengthy, detailed shutdown and startup process. And if the shutdown wasn't done just right, the engine wouldn't start again without, major work being done to it. And if it was done right, it still might not start. And then you add to that 50 degree below Fahrenheit temperatures and oil's freezing and kind of thing. It was not only unpleasant for the crews, but it was pretty unpleasant for the planes. I'm just polishing it now. Get rid of the sanding marks. Anyway, yeah, this was so big that a lot of models at the time were built in 1/48 scale. But this was often produced in like 1/100th scale even, because it was just so big that they didn't make a model in 1/48 scale, and they still don't, because I've been trying to find one. All of the models of planes that I haven't built that are in the shelves over there are 1/48 scale. The B29 is big. It's interesting though, like the SR-71 is almost the same size as a B29, I think. Just huge. A lot. You can still see the circle, or where the circle had been, because the epoxy, if it filled it in, is clear, but I can't feel it, so that's good. So the seat now is ready to be that there isn't. Yeah, the seats. Yeah, I'm gonna wipe this down a little bit with some denatured alcohol to get the sanding dust off of it, and then I will add it to the board over there. Piece of cardboard with the tape on it, so that it can be primed as well for painting. But before I do the machine guns, I'm going to put a second coat on the. Oh, I'm doing this. So I'm going to do the same thing to this, because this had a lot of sanding dust on it. This is a recommended thing. When I read a book about how to make models, well after I was a teen making models, thought, well, if I'm going to do it as a retiree, I should learn how to, how to make models. There is a suggestion, not just a suggestion, almost a mandate. It's wash the parts, not just to get any kind of dust off of them, but also oil from your fingers and that kind of thing. And I sometimes remember to do that. So far, it hasn't caused a problem, but if you're ever really, really serious about making models, even more serious than I am here, it would be, it's a good thing to do that. There. So these can be primed. This primed here and here, and then these two have to be flipped over and primed on the other side. And then these machine guns, in there where there is a little bit of flashing exists where the two halves of the mold came together. I need to clean this up a little bit, put some of these things away. For the machine guns, I'm going to be using not that, not the 600. I'm going to use the 800, grit. There, it may be even, I might even use this, which is like a emery cloth, which is pretty nice stuff. My machine gun sanding material. Okay, it's not too bad. I missed a spot there. Give this another shaken up. This came out pretty well on this side. This, except for that little flaw. I missed a little spot there, and it's clearly not even. Missed a little spot down there, too. Yeah. Oh, jeez. This You didn't see that. I was reaching for the brush and I hit my thumb across the top of the bottle and, well, I almost dumped it. That would have been really bad. Spilled an entire bottle of paint all over the workbench. I would have I would have stopped the stream while I clean that up. Okay. That goes pretty fast. Let's let that dry. I think it'll look okay, but I'll probably end up putting a third coat on it. I don't know for sure. I will find out when it dries to see how it looks. Cleaning this brush. A lot of paint in the brush there. So I'm going to be kind of going back and forth apparently during this monologue about back and forth between airplane models and the real airplanes. I grew up in the late 50s and early 60s where all sorts of things were happening in terms of planes. But I'm going to use the alcohol wash here. It's isopropyl alcohol, and oftentimes water is sufficient, but sometimes if the brush holds a lot of paint, then it helps to use a little bit more aggressive solvent to get the paint out. And you go, well, get the paint out so that in a little while I can get the paint back in. Okay, so although growing up there was some interest in the piston planes at World War II, actually not that much. I spent most of my time paying attention to more recent developments in military planes. Some development in the bombers, like I was talking about, the B-36, which was just absurd sort of thing that was necessary until thermonuclear bombs were made smaller. And then the development of jet bombers. And the first one was the B-47, which had 6 jet engines on it and didn't go all that far. And then the B-52 that was developed in the 50s and is still somehow or other in active service. It's incredible. Was built with 8 jet engines, 4 pods of 2 each, which were essential at the time because jet engines were really not all that powerful. When you think of them as being that way, but they actually weren't. And so it needed all of those engines to mainly just to take off. I'm not sure. I think they might have even shut some of them down during flight. The seam is really obvious. It's hard to tell when it's gone, though. And you can't see it. You can't see what I'm doing. But right along, this is right along the top here, is where the two halves of the mold came together. And there's just a little bit of a raised surface. Plastic oozed out between the two halves of the mold and left a line of raised plastic. Now, as I'm sanding this, you can see the darker color. That's the plastic underneath the primer. So as I'm sanding this, it's sanding that down. To the areas on either side of it. So the sanding process here is confirming that there is a raised line there. And what has happened, I'm kind of afraid of that. What's actually happened here is I can feel it here, is that one side is slightly higher than the other side. The two halves of the mold, really close. They came really close, but they're not lined up. And so the ridge is not just a line, but it's actually a ridge, an asymmetric ridge. So one side needs to be sanded down to match the other side. Really hard to see it, but I can feel it with my fingernail. So the B-52 had just an immense carrying capacity. Huge amount of weight, a huge weight of bombs. And it's still some of them are flying in active service to this day. I think virtually every part of the plane has been replaced, to keep it going. Certainly different engines. Jet engines now are more powerful and reliable. And the early ones, it still has 8 of them. Why not? It was designed that way. Not be that concerned about the bottom, except right here at the front, where if you look at it, you'll be able to see these. And as I sand it, you can see the line emerging again where the two halves are not symmetric. And that extends all the way down here. It's just little stuff like this that you'd think, well, you can barely see it. Why bother? That really, they show though. They, especially when it's along the top like that, where it just makes the whole thing not great. It's just annoying too. For the most part, this model is really well done, but when you put the circles in, two halves of the mold that don't line up, suddenly it's like here. Now you can really see what's going on as I sand it down. See this very thin white line there? That's where one side is higher than the other. And when the white line disappears, then I know that the two sides are lined up. Back on the top again. I don't think I got it completely. Didn't. Yeah, so instead of monologuing, I'm just going to sigh. Really? Really, this had to happen? This is the bottom. Why am I messing with the bottom? I need to mess with the top here. Well, at least with the priming. I'm, like, prime color is showing me where it needs to be sanded. See, there's a thin, tiny little thin white line where the primer paint, on the lower surface, where there is still a ridge. And when that little white line disappears, then I know that I have succeeded in getting rid of the ridge. And it would work better if I could hold on to the sandpaper, but yeah. And probably I'd like to move ahead with these, but I think it would be best to reprime them. Worry about polishing them too much because this is really fine grained emery cloth, and it pretty much polishes as it goes. Flip it over again, rotated in my hand, and I didn't notice it. Trying to get. This is where a needle file would actually do a good job, but it would leave scratch marks all over it. Right up here, okay, there's a raised edge from the tip of the top of the radiator. I don't want to sand that off, but I want to get rid of this little raised ridge here and is right next to it. Surprisingly, at least see, I'm going to sand this anyway. I'm not seeing a ridge along the top of this. There's definitely a ridge along the bottom. You just use a coarser sandpaper to get that off. Pretty prominent. Okay. As I sand this off, you can see the same sort of white line phenomenon going on here. The place I need to look is the very back of it, because this is going to show here. Well, I'm just going to sand around, because the process of sanding it is showing the flaws. And when I'm done with this, I should be ready to put the third coat on the bottom of the fuselage. Here, this is going to show the back of it, and I want to see if I've got the problem there too. And there is, but it was pretty invisible. Question of the top. Too bad. It looks like the mold kind of ran along one of the edges almost. Okay. Well, now this machine gun. I haven't completely fixed the barrel on the bottom. Since I'm doing it, I might as well do it right. This is there. Even if yeah, one more to do. But it probably should get a repriming. I've taken paint off of more than half of it. I don't know how well the paint is going to adhere to the raw plastic. But I'm a little concerned about with repriming it is getting a primer buildup in the radiator. I think I might. I talk myself out of it. I'm not going to reprime it. I'm just going to wash it with the isopropyl alcohol, and then go ahead and paint. I hope it works. So if you look at this, you can see. I don't know if you can see it or not. Yeah, you can see the indentations. Those are the openings in the radiator, and the barrel shows underneath it. And then the radiator above it with those openings absorbs the heat in the surface area with all those little openings, so dissipates it. So I want the barrel of the gun to be painted. I'm going to paint steel. And then all those little openings, I want to stay dark. So I'm going to get paint down into them. And then I hope that I can sort of dry brush the gunmetal over it, and they'll still show it, at least most of them. At least that's the plan. What I could do, the alternative is to use a wash and have the wash get down into those openings and darken it, but I don't really want to do that in this case. I don't see that the gun barrel needs to be darkened, like with a kind of a gray or a black wash. Well, I've got the second one here. Second verse, same as the first. Same issue with the asymmetric surfaces that need to be polished and sanded out. So I've got it, you can see the white line there now, and I need to make that white line disappear. So that is what I'll be working on now. As time went on, it became clear. Well, actually, what happened was there was the knowledge that bombers were vulnerable to fighter attacks and anti-aircraft fire and things. That became obvious in World War II when massive loss ratios on the British and American bomber fleets. The massed bomber fleets in Germany and Italy. So even though initially there wasn't any way of getting thermonuclear weapons to blow up the other side other than bombers, as soon as warheads became small enough to be put on what were then intercontinental ballistic missiles, the first one that we had was the Atlas, a liquid-fueled missile. As soon as that became available, then there started to be questions raised about why have bombers anyway. If you're the Air Force with Strategic Air Command, you want to have bombers. So I think part of it was just not so much I'll just editorialize. I'm not sure that a lot of it was pure rational military thinking, and part of it was just, we do bombers. But that gave rise to what if the bomber was less vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire? And so the B-58 Hustler was developed, the supersonic bomber. It was a relatively small plane. Wasn't actually much bigger than some of the fighters of the day. It had 4 engines instead of 2, and it carried its weapon and pod on the outside because the fuselage itself was, designed for supersonic flight. It had, when it went supersonic, it burned fuel really fast, and so it didn't have much range. And although they were put in active service, they never lasted very long because it became pretty clear pretty quickly that even though it was a beautiful plane, it wasn't going to be effective because it couldn't get there and back unless it was refueled many, many times. The B-52 stayed as the mainstay for a really long time until the B-1 bomber came out. And the B-1 could carry more stuff than the B-58 and had a longer range. It was a swing wing kind of thing. Those are still in active service too. They carried a lot. They had like the B-52, a massive carrying capacity. And it could go supersonic, although for the most part it didn't fly supersonic, except when it was supposedly near its target, then it folded swings back and swooped in. During those days, the 50s, 60s, 70s, speed was seen as if you could go faster, you could. There was a better chance of getting to the target and back. The emphasis was placed on that, at least as far as bombers went. Secretly out in the desert, it's been going on for a long time. development of the F-117, which was not a fighter. I don't know why it got an F designation. Medium range fighter bomber, because it wasn't set up to be an interceptor or air superiority plane. It was a test bed for not being seen, and that changed everything. The emphasis on stealth. And then at the time, real fighters like the F-115, just brute strength kinds of things. And suddenly the jet engines, the turbojets just got so much more powerful. You stick two of those in a plane, and a fully loaded plane would fly straight up because the engines produced more thrust than the weight of the plane. It was impressive technology. Really impressive brute force jets. But then the emphasis shifted to stealth. And then amazing planes, like the SR-71, the Blackbird, flew incredibly fast, but was also designed with stealth in mind. Stealth being, okay, if you've ever seen a demonstration flight of like an F-22, well, hi, I am doing well. Thanks for joining in on chat. I am fixing a problem I didn't know I had. This model has these little machine guns, okay, that go on the top front. Hard to explain if you hadn't seen it. The top of the airplane lifts away to show the interior detail, including these machine guns. And what I didn't notice before I primed them is that the injection molding process left a seam along the top and the bottom where the two halves of the mold did not match. And so I'm sanding those off. Monster creation. I don't know who isn't on. Are you looking to create monsters for like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign? Are you looking to 3D model them so that you can paint them and put them? Oh, yeah. Polar lights, right? All the monsters. That was a thing. From the Mummy and Frankenstein and Dracula, they did models of all of those. I am not the person to ask about that, though. Our DM does. So if you have like specific questions you want to ask, maybe the DM can do a direct message or something later. Rambling on about 1960s airplanes and stuff like that. From when I was growing up in grade school and high school and paying attention to the development of jet planes. Cool. Yeah, we've been basing our campaign largely off of 5E. Our DM actually would really be good at that. Gift of Gabby, because she does. She has made up a bunch of homebrew stuff for us to do battle with. Almost everything we run into has been her homebrew creation. You be going to Discord? You're looking at homebrew monsters for a campaign that you're running? She's pretty familiar with 5e and with the creation of adaptations. Ah, okay. So you'd be creating those so that other people could use them in their campaigns. That's pretty cool. Well, you want to get hold of our DM, Alexis, our dungeon mistress, who could probably give you some really good, helpful hints about how to go about doing that. I know we've been, especially recently in our campaign, running into these creations. This mad scientist created these things using quicksilver, and it's kind of gruesome, really. What this mad scientist has done is really unpleasant, is infusing people with quicksilver. And they heal. The Discord. Somebody else just asked that and found it a while ago. I am so inept at social media, including our own. If you look, are you watching? If you look underneath me, there is a scroll that shows like some of the models that we've done in the past. And it scrolls past our social media stuff. The social media is also posted on the screen before and after. So the Discord is going to be Dice N Dungeons or Dice and Dungeons. I'm sorry, I'm just really terrible at that. But I know that she watches Discord fairly often, and and people are able to communicate using that. I wish one of our other members was on today, but they're not. Okay. Well, this is like the second time in a week that somebody's asked for that. And it's the second time that I've just been able to babble incoherently about my total ineptitude around social media, including our own. But I know it's on, I think, our website, www.diceanddungeons.com, should show access to that. Damn, I'm sorry. But Discord is probably the best way to make contact with our DM. And after the stream, I can let her know as well. Sometimes things like this just, it isn't that I feel old about it, because I am old, but it's just that I feel like I am so totally out of touch with what everybody else is paying attention to. Oh, parts painting. Okay. The parts I've got to paint have painting on both sides, and I don't have any way to hold them. Grab some things here. It's time to do some painting on Dyson Dungeons, and like this whole part needs to be painted the same color. And how do you do that and hold it at the same time? I don't know. Well, I do know. I have a thought. I think this will work. Yes, it will. If I can get it in right. I actually want it to go on this side, because this gets this side. I don't know why there's that hole there. Why is there a hole there? Hi, Lola. Thanks for joining in. Gift of Gabby is asking about our Discord site, and I have had to tell them that I am oblivious to any kind of thing having to do with social media, and I don't know our own Discord channel. Oh, you found it. Great. Yeah, you want to contact Alexis, the DM. Okay, so as I'm getting ready to paint these things, I've been finding all sorts of things I didn't see before, like the mold seams on the machine guns that I've now spent 45 minutes clearing off. And I was about to paint this. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Ole. And I thought, well, how am I going to hold it while I'm painting it? And then it was, well, I'll just stick a toothpick in the hole here. I can do that. And then I can hold it on the toothpick while I paint it. And then I turned it over, and there's a hole there. And I'm sure that the hole is there because when this was injection molded, they wanted to push the plastic down through that, right? And the same thing is showing up on some of these other parts where there was a raised surface on one side and a hole on the other. And I knew I was going to have to deal with that. But this is the front of the instrument panel here. And it's wood. The whole thing is supposed to be wood. And so I need to fill that hole in. I can't paint this part because there's a hole there that isn't supposed to be there. And do I fill it with epoxy? There's divots on the bottom here too. Do I fill that with epoxy and then, or do I fill it with just the regular, with the if I fill it with epoxy, the surface texture should be the same all the way across. I've seen that work. If I fill it with the spackling compound, it'll be a lot faster, but okay, well, it's not going to get painted. 2 hours. I spent 2 hours, and seriously, all I've managed to do is sand down the seams on the fuel tank and on the just. But it's these things that make a difference in how the model looks at the end, right? And having a hole there where this is supposed to be a solid piece of wood is not the way it's supposed to look. I am going to paint this. This is not too bad. These are metal braces, and I've done this before. I can paint the metal braces later. which means that I can hold them. I can hold the piece this way while I paint the wooden frame around it. And then if I have to go back and forth, so I can actually do that. These, I think I can paint. I'm going to, there is this metal piece here that's painted a different color later. And maybe I can clip it. I don't know. I might have to paint this like on one side and then the other. I think that's how I'm going to have to do these, is just paint them on one side and then flip them over. Wow. Okay. I'm going to paint the barrels of the machine guns. I want to get something done today. Yeah. Oh, it's really good at that. Gifted Gabby wants to do homebrewed monsters in 5e. And I sent them to our DM, who has created multiple homebrew monsters. Okay. Many of them. And I think you can probably help too. Paint the insides of these and then flip them over and paint the outside, and hopefully not have paint build up on the edges. If I do, I'll just sand it down and redo it. But I need to fill these holes in, and I'm going to do that now so that this can set around and be sanded down on Wednesday. I'm going to do two different things. I've got these little bits on the bottom. I don't want to, those are going to be scarcely visible. And I'm just going to fill those with the the spackle. Okay. Those aren't very big, but they're there and they might become visible. You can put this stuff in on them. Just overfill them. It doesn't matter because it sands off really quite easily. There, I'll just make a big pink mess there. Why not? Why not make a big pink mess? But this one needs to be filled in, and the surface texture needs to be pretty consistent across that, or else it'll be pretty obvious. And so I'm going to mix some epoxy and stick it in there. But yes, today I managed to spend almost the entire stream just fixing stuff. I paint this, I need to kind of hold it down. That'll work. Just to hold it while I brush paint on it. Okay, I need the tiniest little drops of epoxy here. To be impatient, I'm just going to use the 5 minutes stuff. Now, I don't know how that's going to work. I do know how the 30-minute stuff is going to work, so I'm not going to take a chance. Go with what I know. a dot, a dots of epoxy. And a smaller toothpick. And I'm going to mix this and fill that hole. Hopefully I'll have, I don't know. I'm expressing frustration because this is just really frustrating to discover these things and say, why is this here? There's no point to this. It's going to make it look bad. Yeah, I didn't make, maybe there's enough to fill the hole. I don't know how I should have probed it. I should have probed the hole to see how deep it went. So this is going to have to set and then be sanded down. And hopefully it will be okay. Wow. So on one of these pieces, this one here, there were little bits of plastic for no particular reason, just bulbs of plastic that were sticking out that needed to come off. And it didn't take too long to saw them off and sand them. But this was unexpected and unnecessary. Composure. Time to be composed. And what better way to be composed than to drink coffee, right? I have a lot of trash here. I need to get rid of this. So I'm going to step off camera for just a moment while I get rid of this. Okay, moment's over. I wonder what else I'll discover as I go along here. I'm not sure. Well, guess I'll find out. Okay, I can paint one side of these. I'm going to do that first because if it dries, I'll be able to flip these over and paint the other side. I'm using this color. The frame needs to be painted on both sides, this color. And then here I am putting other things away. How does this look? It's still not quite even. There's a lighter spot there. I'm going to put a third coat of paint on that. But I'm going to paint these other bits first. Why? Because then I can get further along. Well, more often than not, there are these moments of taking really a long time, and I'm spending a lot of time working on things that I didn't know that I needed to spend time working on. And doing that instead of spending time talking about 19 development It's in 1960s jets, I guess. Well, this brush should work. Both of these parts are going to be multicolored. This one, the thing that's clipped on here, these are metal brackets. And I'd show it to you, but it's buried underneath other stuff. Yeah, I'm going to use the paint out of the bottle cap here. The frame itself is wood. And the wood is being simulated by this desert yellow color, which doesn't look woody at all until I put some brown wash on it. And then it looks okay. And it turns out that painting the edges actually is very important because they show, because this is a cutaway model, in that the top of the fuselage lifts off, revealing the detail below. I should be doing this with my head magnifier, because when I put my head magnifier on later to paint the wooden, the metal strut parts, I will find that for some reason this yellow paint, desert yellow paint, isn't applied evenly, even though to the naked eye, these are my naked eyes, it looks fine. So when this paint dries, I'll be able to paint the dark gray metal supports that are on here. And then at some point then in the future, get the brown wash out and wash the wooden frame. And then it will look woody. Wood-like. It will look wood-like as opposed to not looking wood-like, which is what it looks like now. Trying to make sure I cover all the surfaces that need to be covered, because that's another thing I sometimes discover when I put my head magnifiers on, is that, well, yeah, I mean, it's fine except for the parts that you missed. Yeah. Yay. I'm actually painting onto where the metal braces will go later. So you have a missed part there. Just gumming up really fast. I don't know if it's the paint or the brush. Okay, these parts need to be painted on both sides. I can only paint one side at a time because there's no place to hold it. So I'm going to paint this side. I know. So what you're thinking is, this isn't a really good idea, because I'm getting all that paint down there on the paper, and what's going to happen is that then the paint is going to stick, and there'll be all sorts of weird edges and things showing. And that's true. If I left it there, that is what would happen. So noticing that, not anticipating it by like thinking ahead, but noticing that that will be a problem later, I am going to move the piece away from the paint that is on the paper below it. And I'm going to do that when I am relatively certain, fairly certain, that I've painted all the bits that need to be painted. There, and get it off the toothpick. Where'd my other toothpick go? There it is. Same thing to this. Really, this worked before. Making the tip of the toothpick a little bit smaller so it will fit in the hole. There. Or not. Oh, yeah, great. Let's just let the brush sit there and dry out. That's a good idea. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, which is to get paint on all the things that I believe need to be painted, including some things that aren't going to be painted this color. But be painted over this. Yeah, that's not working. Is this on camera at least? Yeah, yeah. My hand's in the way, so you can't see what I'm doing. But what I'm doing is putting this desert yellow paint on the parts that are supposed to be wood. And then I will, when this is dry, I'll turn it over and paint the other side. And when that's dry, then I'll paint the dark gray metallic attachments. And then I will come back with the desert yellow and repaint the spots that need to be painted because I got the dark gray onto the yellow, desert yellow places where it's supposed to be desert yellow and not dark gray. Yeah, it's going to be iterative like that because, you know, there's always spots for me and maybe for you as well. When you paint one color up to the next color, the boundary line isn't perfect. I shouldn't say perfect. I should say adequate. Well, I did some painting. Huh. Yay. And I am going to put another coat of paint on the bottom of this. It's really close as I look at it, but right there, there's a place where it's not covered adequately. This side, that side looks good. I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to put another coat on this end here, especially here. Okay, this is This is to not be messed with now. This is, it's good enough to not be messed with anymore. Set that aside, let it dry. I'm going to cap this up because I'm going to be painting a different color, and I would knock it over. It's just, that is what would happen. And I don't want to, I've almost done that like 3 times already in the last week and a half, is almost knocked that jar of paint over. Okay, these brushes, both of these brushes are holding a lot of paint, so they need to be thoroughly clean. And then to paint some detail, what I hope will be detail, what I hope will become detail on the machine guns. The butt first here. Why am I'm just cleaning brushes. Why did I stop talking? Okay, it's past noon. It's time for size. Yeah, people say, "Why are you sighing? Is something wrong?" And it's like, yeah, I'm old enough that just need to sigh. Just sometimes well, what it is really is just getting rid of carbon dioxide or something. I keep this brush out because I have to paint the other sides of those. See if I can remember to do that. I don't need this brush anymore. What I want to do, these parts are going to get primed so that I can work on painting them on Wednesday. This is the fuel tank and the ends of the fuel tank. And as I said at the beginning of the stream, because the ends of the fuel tank have these bands on them, I'm going to find it easier to paint those bands because there's only one side where there's a boundary layer. It'll actually be a lot easier to paint this too, because I'll be able to just paint across it and not have to worry about getting paint on the bands. The seat here, the inside is painted khaki and the outside metallic. And I'll probably try to put like a gray wash on the khaki just to make it look a little bit weathered. But I didn't pull this off just to really just show it to you. I pulled this off so that I could get to the part underneath it, which is there. Oh. I was going to show you the other. I was going to show. No, it's just so dumb. I'm not even going to admit what it was. I'm not even going to say it. Nope, not happening. It was just really, it was beyond a senior moment, I think. It was embarrassing. So it didn't happen. What is going to happen is I'm going to get this paint color called steel, which is a really dark metallic color. And if one looks closely at these machine guns, you can see the texture, see the openings there, of the radiator that is around the barrel of the machine gun. And I want that to show. And there's different ways of doing that. One is to paint it all one color and then try to apply a wash to it and hope that the wash builds up inside those little indentations, okay, to make them look darker. And I am not going to want to do that really because I just want them to be different colors. So what I'm going to try to do, which may or may not work. If it doesn't work, then I'll try the wash thing. is I'm going to use the steel paint, and I'm going to paint those little indentations steel so that they're a darker color. Okay. And then when I get the gunmetal out, which is the color of this whole thing, I'm going to basically dry brush over that so that it doesn't go into those indentations and they stay dark. And then it will look like the barrel of the gun is wrapped in a radiator. And then I guess I'll turn it around and paint the stock. And there's some detail on the stock, a mount there, and some sort of attachment bit that also will be painted in some sort of detailed. I'm going to paint it a different color after the whole thing is done. But now what I'm going to do is get the paint into those little openings by dropping the brush, knocking the brush out of my hand. Yeah, I hope this works. We'll see. We'll find out on Wednesday after this is dried, after this paint is dried, and then I put the other color on. This needs a good deal of stirring on the vortex thing that you can't hear. I can sometimes, if I get it just right, I can make everything kind of wiggle like that. There we go. Get it into the camera around a little bit. Oh yeah. So jets. So those, I talked about bombers, but the development of interceptors. Not so much fighters. Okay, they were the F-100 series with an actually pretty amazing and rapid development of jet planes. And I'll call them fighters because they were the F series, but they were the main purpose of the. Well, no, I'll go back. Originally, the F series was like the F-84 and then the F-86, and those developed during the Korean War. And what we discovered, it was just like in World War II, the same sort of thing, that our tendency was to make fairly heavy, somewhat overpowered planes that they didn't, they weren't extremely maneuverable. Okay, like compared to the planes that the adversary, like in Korea, was really the Soviet Union with their MiGs, were lighter, highly maneuverable planes that just, I have to put my head magnifier on. Sorry, I can't see what I'm doing. Okay, so they could outturn us. Basically, they could run circles around us, but they didn't dive as quickly. And they were kind of vulnerable. So it was the situation was a lot like it was actually in World War II, when the Japanese planes were just lighter and more maneuverable. And we had to develop tactics to deal with that. Just making a dive and attacking and getting out of the way real quickly. I really don't know how this is going to turn out. Like I said, I'll find out on Wednesday. I hope it does. These indentations are fairly deep. If I'm careful when I'm painting over it, they should still be this darker color. Get this paint down into them. I'm not trying to confine the paint to the indentations as much as I am, well, trying to make sure that it gets into them. In fact, I probably will. I am just going to do this. I'm going to paint the whole thing. I'm just going to paint the whole thing. And then overpaint it later. That way, I can be sure that I've covered what needs to be covered. And maybe the result will be a little bit more uniform too. I'm not sure. But that's what I'm going to do. And then hopefully this whole thing will look different when I overpaint it. Not in the sense of putting too much paint on it. When I paint over it with the gunmetal color. But that's the intent, and we'll find out on Monday whether the intent, whether the reality ends up matching intent or not. There were several developments in jet fighter, at least on the Air Force side. I didn't pay that much attention. I have to apologize for that, to what was happening on the Navy side, because I know that there was some really interesting things happening there until everything converged with the F4. Or Phantom came out, that turned out to be, oh, this plane does everything really pretty decent. So everybody's going to get it. And it wasn't designed that way. It just turned out to be that way. But that's a little bit of history. But before that, most of what I know, because I grew up with it, most of what I remember, I should say, was on the Air Force side. So after the F-86, the 100 series came out, because that's where the numbers ended up, starting with the F-100, which actually was a pretty decent plane. It was designed with aerial combat in mind. So it was really the first plane that was designed to be able to fly supersonic in a level flight. It had supersonic capability with its afterburner. Didn't do that very often. I mean, it wasn't like it did that all the time, but it was capable of flying at supersonic speeds. Now, there are some people who will claim that, Jaeger in the X-1 were not the first to break the sound barrier, but that the F-86 was actually able to do that in a shallow dive, and did that. I don't know, the stories, you hear these stories. It was like, well, yeah, we did that all the time. It was great fun going in a shallow dive and then breaking all the windows in the officers' quarters, that kind of thing. Okay, this looks pretty good. I'm hoping that the overwash works. We'll see. I mean, I don't know if you can't see it here, but the indentations of the radiator are fairly obvious, and if they get highlighted when I put the gunmetal color on, which is the color it's supposed to be gunmetal, not steel like this. And I'll follow the instructions. Why not? Then it might turn out to be okay. Let's see. Time is marching on. Anyway, the F-100 was basically a souped-up version of the F-86. It flew faster and higher, had more powerful engine. It still had machine guns in the nose as its armament. And it could, wow, this brush really absorbed a lot of paint. And it could fly. It could go supersonic in level flight. So there wasn't. It's like, okay, so the X-1, a rocket plane, broke the sound barrier, yay, hooray, and then jets started doing it routinely. That happened really pretty quickly. As jet engines got powerful enough, and afterburners worked to be able to push a plane through the sound barrier. The F-100 was actually a really beautiful plane. Just the lines, or I have to say, it was very pretty, and it was the Thunderbird plane for a long time. I think the model I have, since I have a model of almost everything, all these models that I bought after I retired that I'll never get around to building, and the kids are going to have to sell to some of you later. I think the model of the F-100 I have is actually designed to be in Thunderbird livery. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure. I'm fairly certain that that's the case. Okay, need to. Now, this is dry enough. I can flip these over. I'm going to keep my head magnifiers on because there's just, like I suspected, it's not covered very well. And hopefully I can make it so that they're covered better. I'm going to try to do this so that, yeah, there. I want to hold it up and not just hold it down. There's a lot of coverage issues on these that I need to fix. So that was basically set up to be an air superiority and interceptor. Okay, so that it would attack enemy bombers, because that's what we were afraid of, was the bears and the bisons coming over. Those were the code names we gave Soviet planes. They're still flying their bear, just like it came out about the same time as the B-36, but they still are flying it as a reconnaissance plane. Because it has really long range. Anyway, yeah. And then there was the F-101. I believe that was called a Voodoo. And that was designed to be both a superiority fighter, but also like a ground support plane. That didn't fly that much. I don't remember it. I'm sure it was in active service. All of these were. Painting all, looking at it from all the different angles here, trying to make sure that it all gets painted. It was an interesting looking plane. It had really cool sharp angles all over the place. It wasn't stealthy. That didn't exist at the time, but it was designed differently than some of the others. Then there was, in order, they named, numbered. The next one was the F-102, the Delta Dagger. And this was designed purely as an interceptor, which meant the idea was to get into the air quickly and get to the Soviet bombers that were, coming to blow us up. Wanted to get to those as quickly as possible. So this was designed to do a supersonic sprint and fire missiles at the bombers. The maneuverability was not an issue with this plane. Okay, it was not designed to just be a highly maneuverable dogfighter kind of thing. It was designed to go fast, get there, shoot down the bombers, come back. Oh, and to do that quickly and to make sure that they didn't deliver their payload and blow us up, which would have been bad. That was the F-102. And then the F-103, I have no idea. I'm sure there was one. And if I looked it up, or if you looked it up, you could find out what it was. But whatever it was, it wasn't a thing. But the F-104, the Starfighter, was also an interceptor, and for a very long time was the fastest and highest flying plane in the world. It was pretty much just an engine. The plane was pretty much just a powerful turbojet engine with a cockpit up in the front and stubby little wings, the most absurd looking little wings that you could, really teeny little wings. Because every time I look at it in a different angle, there's a spot that's missing paint. But the idea was get up off the ground, fly really fast, really high, shoot down whatever's coming. It carried 2 missiles, one on each wing. And succeed in one's mission. Since it's holding on with the toothpick here. Hi, welcome back. I'm just painting parts here. I'm talking about the 100 series of U.S. Air Force jet aircraft. So the F-104 was just a jet engine with a little bit of a cockpit, and it set all sorts of records for speed and height at the time because it had teeny little wings, and the wings were tiny. They really were. If you see one, look it up and look at it. The wings were really tiny, so that they didn't get in the way of the speed. But it made it very difficult to fly because, well, for one thing, it couldn't, because the wings were little. There wasn't much of them. It had to get going really fast in order to take off, especially when it was loaded with fuel and missiles. But the same thing happened on the way down, because it has stubby little wings, itsy bitsy little flaps, right? Relatively speaking. And so the landing speed was also much higher than most other planes at the time. And as a result, it was very challenging for the pilots. They used them in Germany, and the accident rate among pilots learning to fly it was really quite high. I learned later that it was exaggerated, that it wasn't terribly much worse than it was with other planes, which was pretty high almost for everybody. The planes were kind of self-lethal in a lot of ways back then. But it was, kind of a stunning looking plane. Just the the small wings. The one feature of it that one is not aware of unless you actually get to go up to one was that the edges, the leading and trailing edges of the wings, like for a reason, I'm sure it had to do with air resistance, were razor sharp. And that's not an exaggeration. When it was on the ground, they actually covered the leading and trailing edges of the wings with a cover. It was like a felt cover with a wooden or metal frame around it, and they would put that on the trailing and leading edges of the wings so that the people who were walking around it, if they bumped into the wing, didn't cut themselves. And that is actually true. So the Museum of the Air Force, they had one there. Of course, they have one of everything. And it was, whoa, what's this weird cover on the wing for? And not supposed to touch this stuff, but I did, and it really was sharp. It was kind of the equivalent of I would say if you had a knife, like a carving knife, and the blade was just a little dull, so probably you couldn't slice through a sheet of paper by dropping the paper onto the blade. Um, but nonetheless, you knew that if you hit it hard, it would cut, and that that was true of the wing on that plane. Is you could really hurt yourself on it. So totally understood why they had sheaths covering them. Well, I'm glad I put the head magnifier on to do this, even though I'm doing just like base coating, because it just was too easy to miss the spots, and the part that I had painted earlier without these looked really scabby. Still does, kind of. Take these off because my eyes have decided that they don't like to be focused. So that was the F-104. The F-105 was a totally different kind of plane. It's a Thunder Chief, known as the Thud. And it was a two-engined, very heavy fighter bomber designed for ground support. Really powerful plane. It could go supersonic if you wanted it to. It had that capability. All the planes did then. But it was designed to drop bombs on people. And so, the F-105 Thunder Chief, it was used a lot in Vietnam as a ground support, and it had the capability of being an air superiority plane as well. So the Thunder Chief was like, in the same series, but that's just because they numbered them sequentially. It didn't have terribly much in common. What I should do, okay, I hit this other part here. just examining it since I had the paint out to make sure that it's, it's almost but not quite. Almost but not quite. There's just a spot here. What needs to be done to this piece is that these struts that aren't painted need to be painted the dark gray color of the attachment points for the instruments, or for, in this case, the metal braces that hold the piece together. That same color, put them in the screen here. So these braces are to be painted that dark gray that I've used before for, well, in the instructions say to use for the attachment points of the control surfaces of the plane. And if I were to turn this over to show you the other side, which I'm not going to do because it's not quite dry yet, you would see how it's been used. I could start painting these now because this piece is dry, but the same color is used here and here and here and here. And so it makes more sense just to wait and do them all at one time, which is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to paint those today. This is drying pretty nicely. It looks okay. I'm just going to cover that with a paper towel when the stream ends, because by then it should be dry enough to be able to do that. These guys get primed and they'll be painted on Wednesday. There'll be multiple colors of metallic paint on the fuel tank. I'm going to be painting as much as I can, a lot of the detail of the bolts and strapping and things that were used to hold the tank together, because they went through the trouble of designing and molding them in. I'm going to try to make sure that people can see them. And then the seat, that. So I'll be using metallics on this, but these will get primed, and then I'll be working on painting these on Wednesday. Also on Wednesday, I'll be painting the German gray braces and attachment points on these parts, and then painting the machine guns. This color, gunmetal, and then maybe doing some washing on them. After the metal parts are painted and I get the edges, the contact points between one color and the other adequate, and there'll be some iteration back and forth, tiny as it usually is, in almost invisible dots of paint to get them just right. I'll get the brown wash out and wash these like I did, like this piece. Okay. Why is there a white spot there? There, it's dirt. So that it looks more wood-like than not. And then that one, then these will join those in the done pile. So it looks like I've got a fair amount of painting, a lot of detail painting, which for me takes a long, long time. It goes very, very slowly. Oh, thanks so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yep, I will be back on Wednesday doing more very, very slow application of detail painting on these parts that are sitting here drying now on my highly sophisticated holding them up while they're drying apparatus. I find it actually works pretty well. You find this little hole in the, an attachment point or something on a part, and stick a toothpick in it just so it holds it, so that can paint all of the edges without having to, touch wet paint to a surface. But I want to talk about the F-106 first. I've got enough time to go from the F-105 to the F-106, the Delta Dart. It's unfortunately named. Have a great day, too. I actually did some painting today. Not a lot. As you can see, the surface area is relatively small except for this. But I did some painting, and I'll be doing more painting on Wednesday. And, and some assembly. If the painting goes well, I'll be able to assemble the fuel tank also. Let's see. Find out how that goes. And then I'll be able to turn this over and look at the other side. And when I start doing the brown wash on these pieces, I will also be able to do it on that, which on a place that you can't see because it's on the other side. There will be some relaxing gluing, maybe. Oh, yeah, just so that you know that it won't be going along all that quickly. If you can see here, like there's this hole here. See there's a hole. That hole needs to be filled in. And I am... Okay, it doesn't... I can actually do that now. I was looking at this, and that hole exists because of a molding, the way it was molded. And there's a hole. I can't fill that one in because the part has to go in from the other side and be attached first. And I don't want to fill that in now because then I won't be able to get the little probe through it. Anyway, on the backs of these, there are holes, and those holes will need to be filled in and sanded down. And that will mean that the dark metal paint, I'm not going to bother painting this side now because that'll be sanded off and then repainted. And probably some of the brown around the edges as well. I'm not going to wash these until the holes are filled in, sanded, and painted over. Because if I wash them and then sand it off, it's really hard to touch up again later. I'd forgotten about the holes on the outside. And just like the hole in this piece, okay, that wasn't supposed to be there, it'll get filled in probably with epoxy and then sanded down, and then I'll have to be touching up, doing touch up of the gray paint and the brown paint. And when that's done, then I'll be able to wash these. This one, on the other hand, once I get the dark gray on there on both sides, and I'm satisfied with the boundaries between that and the brown paint, I'll be able to wash this frame and add that to the very, very small collection of already finished parts. Okay, Wednesday, fuel tank painting, maybe seat painting, metal brace painting, machine gun painting, and metal attachment point painting. And then we'll see how that goes. Oh, and then this sanding that epoxy spot down and painting. So I'll be using this guy more, and I'll be using the German gray and gunmetal. And on a seat, 2 different colors that I haven't used before. Yeah, if it were just painting the model and gluing it together, like I would have done when I was a kid, it'd be one thing, but it's finding holes that shouldn't be there, that mar the whole look of the surface, okay? Or finding mold seams, not mold like in gray, black mold or anything like that, but seams from the molding process on the machine guns. And then checking now that they have metallic paint on to see if I managed to get, it looks like I did okay. I don't see a flaw. Serious anyway. It took, like a half an hour to get the little ridge that was created by the molding process to disappear from the tops of the machine guns. At least I think I did. Sorry, I might not be satisfied with how that looks. I have to see if this is an illusion or a delusion. It's actually okay, at least on that one. It was just the way the light was reflecting. Yeah. This isn't the color it's going to end up being, but if you look at it, it doesn't have a line down the middle where the two parts were unaligned. That I sanded that out. So there's that. And I'm doing all of that little detail prep work because I want this model to look really nice when it's done. So I'm, sanding out seams, sanding out mold marks, looking at the boundaries between one color and the other with the head magnifier, filling in holes or dimples, like on the back of this chair. There was you can still see the remnants of it where I filled a hole in with epoxy and tried to make a circle disappear. I can't feel it anymore. Just because the injection molding process is not very precise. Thanks everybody for joining in. I'm going to be back on Wednesday working on all of these parts. Very slowly, apparently, very slowly, but hopefully surely. Yeah, I'm not going to say the joke. And eventually it'll get done. Just like I'll be spending some time sanding down the bubble of epoxy that's filling in that hole. And then on a smaller scale, which means slower probably, doing the same on these parts where these holes are showing there and there. Those have to be filled in so that they become invisible. And on we go. This is all I accomplished today. It took 3 hours to do what you can see here. And I got to talk about the F-Series of the F-100 series, the 100 series of fighters. And I didn't talk about the Delta Dart very much, which was my very favorite plane growing up. I absolutely loved the F-106. I don't know why. Maybe because it was really fast and beautiful. But on Wednesday, maybe I will come back and start with that and talk about that. Because why not? 1960s jet fighters were pretty exciting stuff. I haven't even started talking about the Fox Bat, right? The Soviet equivalent of all of these. Thanks for watching. Thanks for getting into chat. Yes, another reason to finish about 1 o'clock is my incoherence that develops right about that time. Jeez. I just found a brush sitting in the solvent trying to get clean that wasn't. So as I clean this brush, I will say thanks everybody for watching, joining in on chat if you did. tell everybody on Earth that this is Relaxing Painting with Dice and Dungeons. On Wednesday, I'll talk about our Dungeons and Dragons show, which I didn't do today because I was busy talking about the 100 series of fighters and complaining about the molding, the problems of the injection molding that screw up the appearance of the model parts. But I will on Wednesday do a major plug for our Dungeons and Dragons show, so be sure to come back then and listen to that, because that's how this whole thing got started. So thanks for now. I'll be back on Wednesday right about 10, and until about 1. Maybe there'll be a little break in between, maybe not. I will probably get up a couple of times just to clean things up or move them around and talk more about 1960s jet airplanes. See you then. Bye.